Okay, everyone, welcome to the final session in our first Tivian Masterclass. As predicted last week, the rains have come, but what better way to brighten up our day than taking a look at how the guide data can be presented in a custom MySight dashboard. So you probably recognise my voice by now, but for those who are joining for the first time, I'm Jay Hartley, the UK Customer Success Manager, and today I'm joined by my third guest of the series. So I'll let David, not guest, introduce himself.
Hi everybody, thanks for that, Jay. Yep, I'm David Kellis and I'm one of the principal BI consultants at Tivian, and I'll be showing you through what we can do custom dashboard wise using guides.
So as mentioned, we're at the final stage of our series. The first 3 sessions looked at the out-of-the-box products available to you with the right license. With these, you can get up and running and provide managers or key stakeholders with the ability to run their own programs and see the data in dashboards. However, there is a second, more advanced option for reporting, and this is what we're going to look at today with our custom dashboards that allow you to do much, much more. Before I forget, please be sure to submit any questions via the question panel in the webinar controls. So, let's just have a quick recap of each area we've covered to set the scene for today's session. Starting with portals, these can be set up by anyone with a minimum of fuss and require no advanced website building skills. They're the hosting site for your guides and dashboards. They can be managed and controlled through permissions to ensure that different people can access different content. And we'll see why this is very useful later when you consider the use cases for custom dashboards, for example, an overall HR or central CX view. Our guides provide workflows into which you can align your feedback initiatives. By creating bespoke surveys, you can link these to a guide and provide non-administrative users with the ability to launch their own programs. They can be launched multiple times by individuals or across a whole business. Again, this is where the MySight dashboards can be used to collate or trend the results of each guide. And finally, the dashboards. So last week, we looked at the out-of-the-box Tivian dashboards, which have got specific outputs linked to certain guide or feedback workflows. These dashboards provide excellent insights to end users and can be configured by anyone with the right access and licensing permissions. However, sometimes you may require greater flexibility, have specific calculations you want to present, you might want to report trend or report at aggregate levels. This is where our MySight dashboards and BI teams step in. Today, Dave is going to show you how to hook up a guide to a MySight dashboard, demonstrate the key guide information that is pulled through to Tableau, and also a few use cases for our custom dashboards. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to David to take us through all this and more.
Brilliant, thank you, Jay. So let's have a look at the MySight dashboard side of things in relation to guides. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm actually going to jump out of the slides here and jump across into EFS to actually show how we go about configuring this. So bear with me, I'm just going to change screens here. So hopefully you can see this screen that I've got. Now there might be some aspects of this that you've seen in previous presentations, but essentially there's a few key sort of configuration areas within EFS that we look at prior to generating the data source that we need to build our dashboard. And when it comes to guides, you have your portal, you have the guide module in here, which I'm not going to go through everything in here, but you have a few sort of key settings areas. One is the questionnaire, the project that you're going to use within this guide to generate the survey data. You have a results tab in here, which links into an area called MySight that I'm going to go through in a second. And when you've got dashboards that you've built using the custom data source, you can then see those back in here from a MySight process. So we haven't got any in here at the moment because it's not been built, but I will show you that process in just a second. But you can basically select which dashboard you would like to use as your target in effect, excuse me, to see the results. That will be part of the portal. So in effect, if you start your guide, start generating results, you can turn on when you would like to see the dashboard. So you can see at the top, do you want to see it immediately after the guide has started or at the guide end? And that gives you a little bit of control. Some people won't necessarily want to see results until the whole process is finished or until they know they've got a certain number of results, for example. So that gives you some flexibility. Once you then start a guide, you will get a results button appear at the appropriate time. So as I say, either at the end or as soon as the guide has started. And pressing that results button will inject you into the dashboard. And it'll also do a little bit of sort of pre-configuration of the dashboard as you enter it to give you the specific results of that guide. Now I'm going to talk around that a little bit more just now. Now, in terms of survey projects, in sort of classic EFS area, we have a project here around job satisfaction, which is like any other survey project, but the key thing is that it has been linked into that guide module in the portal. And rather usefully, that then means that we can go and get a little bit more information when we configure our MySight process. So MySight lets us generate a data source to use in Tableau, where we can then go and construct custom dashboards over and above the built-in dashboards, Tableau dashboards that you might find within your existing guide. These are the ones that let you just do a lot more customization, build your own formulas, and I'm going to run you through that in just a second. When we build a MySight process, there is a configuration area where we can go and select the project that we're interested in. When a project has been added to a guide, there are some useful additional fields that become available. This whole suite of fields denoted with the ODG value are ones that we can add to our data source, our custom data source, to bring in more information about how the survey was launched, in effect. So the guide will tag some additional information in, such as an ID, a manager ID, for example, when the guide wave was sent out, so dates and so forth. And that allows us to distinguish which survey it is, because a guide might be initiated multiple times. That then allows you to go back and see the results of a specific wave. So what I was mentioning just now in terms of when that results button appears, either when you've launched the wave or at the end of the wave, each wave from the guide will generate a separate strand of results. And that is determined by this field called the guide wave ID. But the additional fields in here, such as the manager ID, can add further distinction to that guide in terms of filtering down to maybe if you've got 3 different managers in your team and they each initiate different guides, not only will there be a guide wave ID, but that guide wave, that guide instance will be tagged with who the manager was that initiated it. And thus we can then provide results at different levels. So maybe the manager goes in and looks at their specific guides. Maybe an administrator or somebody in charge of those 3 managers wants to see the results for all those managers' waves and see a more aggregated view. So thus we can combine these variables in rather useful fashions. So let me jump across. I'm just going to change screens again. We're going to go across to Tableau and look at the end result or an example of this. So here's one that I've built already, and in this instance, I've added some additional features to this particular dashboard that let me pick and choose which guide waves I'd like to see. And why have I done that? Well, for this example, and also this is available for customers as well, I wanted the ability to not just come into the dashboard for a specific guide wave, but then be able to pick others to do things like trending, aggregate various different waves of data, see the results for different managers and so forth. So I built in Tableau a sort of custom wave selector that will allow us to pick and choose different waves. Again, a dashboard doesn't have to have this facility. It could simply be that when you enter the dashboard, the guide wave ID field, which I've got an example of here, is all that is passed through. So when you select to see the results, you have no wave selector. You might just see the single results for a single survey. But what I've built here in this example is flexible. It lets us pick not just one, but many guide waves or for many managers and aggregate them. So if I were to check a couple of these on, I'll give it a second, we'll start to see some of the results appearing just below. So I need to hit a minimum threshold of results here. So notice the response count was only 2 on the first one. I've got 12 on the next wave. So I've now got 14 results in, and I start to see some data in my chart. Indeed, if I select the All Waves button here, we'll check all of these and we'll get an aggregate of all of these waves. So I'm just going to hide that view. So I've got some flexibility here. I could add all of those results in. I could just have one wave of results. If I don't have that wave selector at all, I would default to the wave that has been selected via portals. But the great thing with this is it means I can change view, for example, and see I've got some very simple trend analysis going on here. So just splitting out the favorable percent scores for each of the waves of data that I've got. And you'll notice that my selection takes advantage of the fact that I know who the manager is. I know what the name of that wave is. I know the date it was initiated. So I can, as I say, I can go through and choose from all of those variables what it is I would like to see and trend against them. And what does that give us? Well, looking at the data source that we've got in play, if I just look up, as I have done here, so looking up guide, the variables that we've got here, such as the guide wave ID, and if I look up manager, for example, we can see those additional fields that I highlighted in the MySight process come through into the data source that we've generated. I have access to this, and this is something that I can build, but the whole point around MySight is that it's also customer facing as well. It's something that we provide as a facility to customers, so that if you've got your own Tableau knowledge in-house, you could generate the data source, generate a dashboard such as this, write your own custom calculations as I've done. So I've got favorable percent calculations. I might have correlation calculations running depending on the amount of results I've got or what it is I want to achieve. The flexibility is there. As I say, there's sort of 3 levels to how you might treat the dashboard for a guide, and that is singular results, all the results for you as a manager or a leader, all of the results of all of your managers, for example, and I can completely configure that, as I say, through the interface that I've developed here that could then be provided to other customers to develop their own dashboards with. If you don't use an interface like that, you could just as easily build that without that sort of custom interface and just take a manager ID or take a guide wave ID and build the data accordingly. But it's exactly the same interface that our usual dashboard building facility allows you to do. So if you've ever used that before going from EFS to Tableau, it's exactly the same. You've just got these additional fields in play that let you do that customization. And when you publish the dashboard back to the server. You can then go into portals and do that additional guide configuration to set this dashboard as your visible layer, as it were, and it just ties the whole thing together. So you've got your guide that lets you launch the survey. MySight sends the results across to your dashboard and customizes that for you, the data source. If you've built your dashboard and you've published that back into portals, that is your results tab that you can then go into and see the output that you've got. So it's, as I say, very customizable and very easy to use. And it may be that you would then use the same template for other guides, and all you then need to do is change the data source and reconnect the same fields up. But obviously when you're using guides, this facility then is almost a case of fire and forget. If you've built all this together and you've got your dashboard and you've published it, if you keep launching guide waves, you don't then need to do any further configuration on the dashboard side. Once it's connected to those waves, the portal will then do the rest for you. So I'm just going to jump back to EFS, because if we go across to the portal side of things, when we add a dashboard into portals, so let's generate a new row in here, we add a new MySight module, and what we can do in here in the additional options section is set a parameter that gets passed to the dashboard when we open it, and that is literally the guide wave ID. There's a little bit more syntax that goes in there, but that guide wave ID, as I showed you in the dashboard side of things, is what the results button will then pass into the dashboard for you to get you to that specific wave. So it's very, very flexible, very, very powerful solution. And once you've set that up, as I say, you could just leave that running, and people can just keep generating results. And certainly the test one that I've got there, we've just left running, and we've got various different results that have been flying into it. So let's just go back to Tableau again. Let's go back across to here. So that is a sort of brief view of what you can expect to see if you need to build a custom layout like that. But it does rely on having a sort of a knowledge of Tableau and sort of the data structure that you need to build. Generally, those two walk hand in hand. If you've got somebody on the team who knows how to build a custom view or how to build dashboards, chances are they'll understand the data structure as well that's coming through. But we also offer training on how to do that. So typically I would spend maybe a morning with a customer. We'd run another webinar session to explain the data source, the components that are in there, and how to go about constructing a visualization such as this with the data. Particularly how to build something like the wave selector, because that uses a series of Tableau dashboard actions in order to get the interactivity to work. But once the template is built, it's much easier to then reproduce. Indeed, the workbook I've got here could be copied and pasted for somebody else to use and change the data source on, for example. So with that in mind, let's go back to the slide deck, I think. Let's just change back to here. So we've just run the demo. And back to you, Jay, I guess. Any questions that we want to go through?
Yeah, so we've got one question in here from Stephen, and he's asking whether there are any limits to the number of guide waves that you can link to a dashboard.
So I've not come across any limits that I'm aware of in here. I don't think that we have got an upper limit. Where our limit sits at the moment is more in terms of, I think it's how many invitees we have to a particular wave at any one time.
Thank you. And this one I think you touched on when you were walking through it. So this question around anonymity. So can you set anonymity, or indeed, if I think the question here is specifically if the customer had control of this, could they guarantee anonymity to their end users?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when it comes to anonymity side of things, obviously the pre-configured dashboards that we've got take that into account. So there'll be threshold limits in there to make sure at least, you know, X number of people have replied before we start showing results. When it comes to building your own dashboard, and if I go into one of the pages here, that's all done formulaically. So if I were to jump into one of the anonymity formulas here, I would generally have to build these specifically into the dashboard. So I'm not sure if yes, you can see the pop-up screen, good. There's a variety of different formulas that one would need to be aware of, and they vary depending on the style of chart that you may be producing, the layout. For example, you may need to check if you're trending, for example, your number of participants who've responded per month. If it's a monthly report, you might need to write a specific formula that then does a total count of participants per month, for example. So you have to build those formulas, but what it does mean is that if you are the person building the dashboard and in control of that data, you do have visibility of all the results that have come in. So from an anonymity perspective, you need to be aware that the person building the results, A, has to build anonymity formulas into the dashboard so that other users see the correct amount of data. You would potentially also need to just add a disclaimer to anybody answering the survey as to how it is being processed and how it is being handled, and that comes down to GDPR. So that's more of a sort of legal issue, as it were. But we have customers who build their own dashboards and obviously take care of that in their sort of legal disclaimers when they go through the survey, just to be aware that we're processing and in control of the data, as it were. But yes, it comes down to building in those anonymity formulas oneself to make sure that what you visualize at the other end is acceptable. That's of course on the basis that you need anonymity. There are times when if you've declared it to all your customers that the results will not be anonymous, then it may be that you don't include that in there, or that you have no demographic information in there, so you don't necessarily need it to be anonymous. If you're just looking at some totals of certain responses, if you don't have demographics in there such as age, gender, ethnicity, and so forth, and you can't discern who anybody is, then you may not need to worry about it at all. So
that's great.
Hopefully that's a fairly detailed answer for that one.
No, that's great. And I think one thing to say to everyone on the call, obviously we've looked at the kind of process today. As David said, we are able to give you guys, if you have in-house Tableau expertise or somebody willing to sort of take it on, you can take that on. However, if you just have a use case and you want to reach out to us for a custom dashboard that is linked to a guide wave, and you have a specific survey that you're looking to kind of run on a regular basis, then contact us, either your account manager, me, or indeed anybody that you've worked with within the Tivian organization, and we can obviously also support that. So David and other members of the BI team can actually build these dashboards for you. So you know, it's not something that you can only do if you've got that expertise available to you. You know, you do have it available. You know, there would be obviously costs attached, but you can get support from one of the team. And I think one area where you know, we've looked at it here and it's touched on before, one area where this works really well is with Leadership 360. You know, it offers you a slightly different use case for dashboarding, because obviously you typically think of Leadership 360 in an individual sense, so for the manager's own personal development, but maybe from a learning and development background, people might be interested in it because you might be able to create an HR view that then looks at maybe where all of your managers might need some help, or indeed if you've built in some demographics, maybe certain managers in certain areas need help in communication or management style, something like that. So again, this is where this type of kind of cumulative reporting on guides is really useful. So that pretty much brings us to a close for the masterclass. So I just want to thank everybody for their attendance and input with the questions over the past 4 weeks. And I also wanted to just let you know that I will be sending a short survey out at the completion of this masterclass, so probably get this out to you tomorrow. It will just basically ask some feedback on the masterclass, on portals, guides and dashboards, but also I'd like to see if you found the masterclass process or approach useful, and if so, what else you'd like to see a masterclass on in the future, because if it's been successful, it's something we definitely want to repeat, where we do a little mini series on certain elements of the EFS platform. So maybe there are areas that you know your business needs a little bit of support on, you can drop it into that survey, and then we will make sure that we look at factoring that into our ongoing webinar plan. Okay, well, finally, thank you from me, and yeah, look forward to seeing you on future webinars.
Thank you from me too.